If George Washington were to visit the White House today, he would be stunned by the change from his small personalized office with a few key advisors to a beehive of workers in a mammoth bureaucracy. He would marvel at what has become an institutional presidency, with White House and executive offices that survive from one administration to the next, ever expanding in size, complexity, and responsibility. Today, presidents centralize policy initiatives in the White House, policies once reserved for members of the cabinet. For cabinet secretaries whose agendas differ from the White House, it can mean a struggle. The power of the executive branch of American government is centered in the White House's West Wing. As President Clinton's chief of staff, that's where Leon Panetta sat, at the helm of the executive bureaucracy.
In the West Wing of the White House, there had to be probably about 100 assistants of one kind or another. And frankly, it's a difficult organization to grab a hold of.
Distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
No wonder. When presidents take office, they inherit the 1,000-strong executive office of the presidency and a cadre of powerful White House advisors. Advisors who now often have a larger voice in making policy than cabinet secretaries.
Cabinet officials have become largely responsible for operating their departments, largely responsible for the ceremonial role that's involved with the secretarial position. But in many ways, they do not get as deeply involved in policy making with the President of the United States as once was the case. And so as a result, there are conflicts that develop.
As Bill Clinton's Secretary of Labor, Robert Reich experienced those conflicts firsthand.
The major policymakers in any administration are people who the public doesn't really hear very much about. Number one, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. The president is always looking over his shoulder to make sure that the economy is being managed well. The president knows that if the economy tanks, the president is not going to be able to be reelected.
When Reich first arrived at the White House, he learned from outgoing director of the Office of Management and Budget, Dick Darman, that OMB was power sinful.
Because that was where the money came from. He controlled the purse strings.
We must make this our most urgent.
They do not have independent executive authority to initiate any major spending.
Money is what it's all about. Money is what makes programs run. Money is what makes that cabinet secretary or that department successful or not.
The other key to power is access to the president. And on that score, those who work in the West Wing have a distinct advantage.
Physical proximity, your closeness, geographically, physically, to the president makes a whole bunch of difference, a big difference.
Presidents are like any other individual. They look for those that are in proximity to them to give them the best guidance. That's why the power, frankly, has gone from the cabinet to presidential assistants, because they have proximity and they deal directly with the president.
The job of controlling access to the president and managing his agenda lies with the influential chief of staff.
Chief of staff's role is powerful by virtue of, if you're talking about somebody speaking on behalf of the president, there's nobody that, when the chief of staff picks up the phone and calls somebody, they understand that they are virtually speaking to the President of the United States, because that chief of staff is the alter ego of the president.
I'd like to now call upon a few of our cabinet secretaries.
Panetta's first order of the day was to institute order. One aide compared the White House staff to a team of second graders playing soccer.
Because all of the kids wind up chasing the ball and not staying in their positions. Everybody wants to chase the ball. And by that, what he meant was that every assistant wanted to be part of every decision that the president was making. So the president was holding meetings in his office that sometimes included, as many as 20, 30, 40 assistants who were in the room. Well, that's impossible. It can't operate there.
So Panetta made it clear that he would decide who would be allowed access to the president.
So I basically controlled who met with the president, who would be allowed in the Oval Office. I also determined who would be allowed on Air Force One to be able to go with the president.
Even as a longtime personal friend of Bill Clinton, Robert Reich sometimes still had to struggle to stay in the loop.
I believe I also want to say a special word of thanks to my longtime friend, Secretary Reich, for
The only way to find out what the inner work is doing is to hang out at the White House. Luckily, as Secretary of Labor and a member of the National Economic Council, I had to spend a lot of time at the White House, and so I picked up a great deal of information.
But despite that access, Reich lost many battles trying to get his social policy agenda cleared by White House advisors. To win important fights, he used his personal access to the president and used the media to make an end run around the White House gatekeepers by taking his agenda directly to the people.
I did have to utilize the media in terms of the major initiatives of the department. We had to be visible because if the public did not understand what we were doing, then it was very difficult to get it through Congress, to get it even through the administration.
Thank you very much.
But going public was a tactic that sometimes landed Reich in trouble with the chief of staff.
When you're talking about the role of chief of staff, it has to be the role of being the person who has to say no to people and the person who has to deliver the bad news. And so that meant that I had to be kind of the point person to make sure that if a cabinet secretary was for whatever reason not in line with what the president wanted to say or do on a particular issue, then I had to call that cabinet secretary and basically say that's not the case.
On many issues, Reich simply had to give up because the White House staff held all the cards and played them. But in the battle to pass the minimum wage increase in 1996, because of its importance to him, Reich pulled out all the stops. He took on a Republican Congress and the skeptics in the White House.
There was some skepticism in the White House initially about trying to get a minimum wage increase because it sounded sort of old Democrat. It's what the old Democrats would do. So I, as a cabinet member, had to persuade my colleagues in the administration that it was doable.
This was a very good day for America's working families.
Ultimately, Reich won the battle to increase the minimum wage and remembers his time as Secretary of Labor as the best job he ever had.
I loved the job. Wonderful, exhilarating, a job that I would take again in a heartbeat.
Today, as director of a public policy institute, Panetta now has time for questions that linger from his days spent running the West Wing. He wonders if the shift of power from the cabinet to the White House staff is really what's best for the country.
Is this the right direction? Nobody's asked that question because, frankly, we deal with the presidency on a day-to-day basis. But I think at some point all of us have to stop and say, is the organization of the White House, the way it works now, with all the power of presidential assistants, is that the direction we want to go in the future? It's an important question that I think future presidents are going to have to ask, but more importantly, the people in this country are going to have to ask.